Anyway, so now we're going to talk about the use of thought records in CBT. And we're going to be taking a look at Christine Padesky's 7-column thought record, which is available in her workbook, which is really quite useful. For me, learning to do a thought record was a real game changer. I was beginning to sort of start to understand how cognition kind of worked with clients. I was listening to clients, and when they came back from between sessions and were talking about positive changes that had happened to them, I would ask them about, what made the difference, and they would often describe a shift in their thinking. And so I began to want to pursue cognitive therapy a bit more. And when I discovered these thought records, I found it to be a really effective way to move a client. I always found, in talking with clients, that I was just kind of going around in circles. And when I started using thought records, a client was able to move from point A to point B, much quicker. And so it was just it just seemed to be a very sort of powerful and more effective tool. So what I'd like to do today is take an example, and we'll just kind of walk through it and use the 7 columns as a demonstration. So I want you to just, I know the cameras are going on, and I just want you to feel free to kind of speak out and whatever. But I'm wondering if we can kind of come up with kind of a case situation that we might want to work through, and maybe something that, even something that's personal for one of you, or maybe something that's common for students kind of studying social work at UBCO. What's something that happens to kind of typical students?
Anxiety.
Anxiety? Okay. And what might be a situation that triggers anxiety for a student? Midterm exam? Okay. Okay, so shall we do that? Take a midterm exam? So let's imagine a hypothetical student who's facing a midterm exam. And we want to kind of push it a little bit. I mean, anxiety is normal, and having anxiety over an exam is normal. But let's push it a little bit where the anxiety is getting in the way of the person being able to either do exams or kind of do their schoolwork. Is that fair? Okay. Okay, so let's start off with that. So tell me a little bit more about the situation of students kind of dealing with midterm exams. So I'm going to put that in the situation column here. So midterm exam. Is there anything in particular that makes that stressful? Not being prepared. So maybe students aren't as well prepared. There's so many other things going on. Is that fair to say? You got other subjects, other assignments, lots of stuff going on?
The results affect your transcript grade, or the grade that goes through your transcript.
Okay, and that's an issue because why?
It stays with you. It's a record of your performance. If you want to move on to other academic pursuits, perhaps you'll need those grades.
So it's a permanent record that may affect your ability to pursue higher education. Okay. Now in CBT, one of the things you'll notice is that we often do a lot of sort of very specific questioning around a situation. And part of this, it helps with kind of the Socratic questioning, the Socratic strategy, and the self-discovery. The more we can kind of talk about the situation that's triggering for the person, the better it sort of fills out the picture. Okay. Okay, so we're looking sort of midterm exams, not prepared, lots of other demands. Worry about the transcripts. Okay. Okay, so how does the student feel? What kind of feelings, emotions go with, I'm going to have a midterm exam and I'm not feeling really prepared for it?
Fear.
A fear? Okay.
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed? Now, just a comment on that. So if a client said overwhelmed, I'd put that in. Is overwhelmed a feeling or a thought? Okay, so there's a little bit of, like, it's a bit of both, but there is kind of a thought in there is that I am overwhelmed, I can't manage this. Okay. What would be sort of the feeling that's connected with the thought I'm overwhelmed? Anxious. Okay. Okay. What other feelings might a student have? And here we want to speculate. We want to push it a little bit further. Okay, so anxiety, fear, okay.
Angry.
Angry, okay. Okay. I'm not really that prepared. What feelings might be attached to that? Shame. Okay. Guilt. Okay. So when we do this with a client, it's good to just come up like with as many sort of things as you can. They may be just very small pieces, but it starts to kind of loosen the client up to say more, and it maybe helps uncover something that hasn't been spoken about. Okay, so what we want to do now is we want to rate the mood, and I always use like a 1 to 100 because it's kind of like percentage. And we want to sort of rate these different moods because we want to identify the strongest mood, the dominant mood that's linked to the midterm exam. So let's say fear. How strong is the fear on a scale of 1 to 100?
50.
50. Okay, so we've got a 50. Okay, feeling overwhelmed.
80.
80. Okay. Anxious. 90. Okay. Angry.
60.
60. Shame.
40.
40. Okay. I know we're just making this up. Guilt.
50.
50. Okay. All right. So we get a client to do that because it helps sort of identify the kind of the dominant thought there. So we'd sort of isolate, okay, anxiety seems to be the strongest emotion that you're having connected to the midterm exam. Okay. So generally that's the one we're going to focus on. But you can have a discussion with the client about which is the feeling that's most troubling to them. But generally it's the one that's the strongest. So then we want to ask, okay, what kind of thoughts are linked to that feeling of anxiety? What goes through your mind when you think about this midterm exam that leads you to feel anxious? Okay. Now you notice here we're starting with feelings before we start with thoughts, because feelings are easier usually for clients to identify. Not always, but usually. So what kind of thoughts are triggered when the student thinks about the midterm exam? I won't know any of the answers. Right? That's a pretty scary thought if you're going into a midterm exam. Right? Okay. I'm going to fail.
Everyone's going to do well but me.
Everyone's going to do well but me. Okay. Now, I'd usually follow that up with a question, so what's so bad about that?
Oh, you want me to answer?
Yeah.
It makes me feel really stupid.
Okay. I feel stupid. Now, I'm not going to argue with the client about that being a thought or a feeling, right? But it's, right, the thought is, you know, I look stupid or I am stupid. Okay. Okay.
You just can't manage.
I just can't manage. Now, one of the things when we look at thoughts, we can look at them in 3 different domains. One domain is, what does this say about me? Okay? So, you know, I'm stupid, right? That's something about me. We can also ask, what does it say about this situation, and what does it say about the world in general? Okay? So if we think about kind of the world in general, what might be some thoughts that the person has? What's that? There is not enough time. Okay. And what does that say about the world in general? That there's not enough time. Okay. So this is where we're kind of going a little more global. Okay. So I can have thoughts about how bad I am, but maybe I have thoughts about like this university, or right. Like if we imagine maybe the anger is a bigger piece of this guy's picture, right?
The system is flawed.
The system is flawed. Right.
I don't see the value of this.
I don't see the value of this. And I'm going to reframe that. There is no value in this. Now, the reason I do that is I know down the road that's going to be easier to work with, and I don't see the value in this. Okay. Okay.
Tests aren't a good representation of knowledge.
Okay. And what's so bad about that?
Everyone expresses their knowledge differently, so it's not fair to everyone.
Okay, it's not fair. And I would have said, is it not fair to you? Is that part of what you're feeling? Yeah. Okay. Okay, so we kind of do this. We have like a good discussion about kind of the thoughts that are going on for the person. And then we do just like we did over here, and we say, okay, which of these thoughts is most closely linked to anxiety? And I'm going to add one more, because we kind of brought it up here with the transcripts. Is there a thought there that this is going to this is going to be detrimental to my future options? Can I add that one in? It's going to mess up my future.
When would you cap the thoughts? Do you ever have clients just go on forever?
I've never had that, but that would be perfectly okay. I mean, usually, there's like core thoughts that are happening for a person, but yeah.
With that last point, tying with the anxiety, I think the client, I can see them feeling a disconnect between the idea that this is supposed to be a learning institution, but the currency are grades. So how am I supposed to learn and make mistakes in a safe space when this is the be all and end all, but I can continue to do something else?
Right. Okay. So I'd work at kind of how would I summarize that? Yeah, but it's a thought about the world. Like this, this is crap. I'm fucked. Like what, right? Yeah, right. That's where the client is going in their head.
Yeah, it's just there's a disappointment, perhaps, or concern.
Okay. And what's the thought that drives the disappointment? I think I've misspelled that pretty badly. Yeah. So again, it's kind of it isn't fair. Did we have that up there somewhere?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not fair. Okay. The system's messed up. I'm being punished for a crappy system. Okay. So let's ask the question: which of these thoughts is the strongest link to the feeling of anxiety? Now we could do kind of the numbers thing again. I think for the sake of time we won't do that. But which one of those thoughts is most closely linked to the person's feeling of anxiety? So if this was you, which one would that be?
I'm going to fail.
I'm going to fail. Okay. Do we have consensus on that? Is that kind of a good... Okay. So I'm having a midterm exam. I'm not, I haven't put as much study into it as I would have liked. I'm feeling terribly anxious because I have this thought that I'm going to fail. Now, I would continue on with sort of some questioning about what's so bad about that. Okay? Because I like to kind of take it a little bit deeper. But let's say we ask that question of the client, so or you as the client, what's so bad about failing?
It's 35% of my grade.
Okay, it's 30, and if you only get 35%, if you don't get that 35%, what's so bad about that?
Failed the class.
Okay, and what's so bad if you fail the class?
You have to pay for it and do it again.
You have to pay for it, so it's a waste of money. Okay, okay.
It only is offered once a year.
And it's only offered once a year. Okay. Yeah, and now what you can do is you can kind of drive this discussion about kind of the catastrophic, okay, if I fail this course, okay, what does that mean about me getting my degree? What does that, I'm going to end, right? And sometimes clients are going to, like, if I don't get this degree, then I'm going to be, I'm going to ruin my life. My parents are going to be really unhappy. Life is going to be miserable for me. I'm going to live on the street, and I'm going to be pushing a grocery cart full of pop cans. Right. And so sometimes what's helpful is just to kind of like unearth some of the catastrophic thinking that's going on for a client. You can also make it kind of humorous, like, yeah, I'm going to be pushing a grocery cart with pop cans in it, right? But let's just go with I'm going to fail, okay? So that's a reasonable hot thought to work with. So let's ask, so then what we do in the process here is we want to engage in our sort of cognitive kind of evaluation of the thought. How accurate is that thought? Is there evidence to say that that thought is true? And is there evidence to say that that thought is not true, right? And so we want to kind of weigh that out. So our next two columns are going to be evidence for and evidence against. Now, I like to frame this as like it's a court case, okay? So let's take this thought and let's put it on trial. And there's going to be two lawyers, and one lawyer is going to say, yep, this is absolutely true. You are going to fail, and you will become a miserable person as a result of failing this exam. And then the other lawyer is going to come up and say, okay, no, actually, I don't think you're going to fail. And I'm going to present the evidence for that. Okay? So in our hypothetical scenario here, where the client is having the thought, I'm going to fail, what evidence is there that, in fact, he might actually fail?
Less prepared.
Less prepared? Right. So, because perhaps we know this as to be a fact, right? That, he hasn't studied a lot for this.
Historical failure rate for the class?
Oh, okay. He's looked up the stats. Okay. We might have a hard time beating that one. All right, okay. So there's some evidence that people do fail this class.
Maybe
Okay.
they've struggled with exams in the past, like they themselves.
Right, okay, so past struggles. Because there's a good chance this isn't the first time. Right. And so when somebody does that, you want to sort of get really detailed. So when was the last time you had this problem? And what happened then, right? Because it may be true, the person may have failed before. And maybe it is a realistic fear that they might fail again. Okay? Okay, what else? What else might suggest? Is there anything else that we can add to that column?
So much anxiety, they shut down.
What's that?
Like the anxiety is too high, so they shut down during the test.
So one of the things he knows about himself is that when his anxiety goes up, he starts to shut down? Is that what you're saying? Yeah, okay. So again, past anxiety has led to shutdown. Okay, all right.
Negative thought patterns are preventing studying?
So part of the experience is
Procrastination.
procrastination, okay. Now, one of the things we want to make sure is that we're sticking to facts. So it's more than I just feel this, or right. So now I don't get. Some of my colleagues are really like hard-nosed, like this has got to be a fact. I try not to get into arguments with clients about what to put on a form, but But the goal here is you want it to be reasonably factual because it's not just about sort of impression. Okay, what's the counter side of the argument? So we bring out, okay, so that's the lawyer, he's the prosecutor, he's got all these nasty things to say about you. Okay, now what's the other side of the argument that maybe you aren't going to fail? What evidence do you have for that?
I have passed a midterm exam in the past.
Okay, so again we go with past experience. Right. And here we want to get really detailed. So tell me what happened, how did that go, you know, and so you give that. Now people will start to kind of give, well, yeah, but that's not that, and then that may just add more evidence. You can just fill that in there if they bring up sort of other things. But past experience, okay. What else?
Still time to prepare.
Still time to prepare. Okay.
Done all the readings and attended all the classes.
Okay, so I did the readings. I attended the classes. Okay. What do you tell yourself when you're kind of thinking, oh, I'm going to bomb this test? What's that?
It's only a test.
It's only a test? Okay. So we're going to put that down here because that's just a thought, right? All right. Because that starts to get, you know, that might be like an alternative thought to I'm going to fail. Okay. So what other evidence might be there that he's not going to do as bad as he thinks he is?
Could it be that he doesn't know why people in the past have failed the class?
So maybe if he found out more about kind of...
Like, he doesn't necessarily know why people have failed before, so maybe it's not that difficult of an exam.
Oh, okay. Okay, so don't know why others have failed. So what you're implying is that there's another reason other than being the students being the exam being too difficult. Okay. Okay. So there might be an alternate explanation. What might be that alternate explanation be?
The exam's the day after Halloween, so everyone's hungover.
Okay. You have quite the Halloween. Okay. After. Yeah. So we might come up with something like that in kind of the discussion. Now, ideally, you want this list to be bigger than this list. Just visually, that works better. It doesn't have to be that way. But you want to have really good, solid arguments. And part of the process, too, is you want to be thinking of this in advance, because this is where you want to get to. Now, if you think that there's a really good chance this guy is going to fail, and maybe that's an accurate thought, you might want to be working with his catastrophic thinking about why that's such a horrible thing. Right? So I'm going to end up homeless pushing a grocery cart full of pop cans. Right? And so if you think that's where it's going to end up, probably earlier on here you want to work at it at a kind of a deeper level. Okay? So then we say to the client, okay, so given these facts, both what you're saying you're not terribly prepared, you know, students often have difficulty in this class, right, past struggles, right, but look at the other evidence, right, you've still got time, you did the homework, you know, and there's other explanations as to why students have had difficulty in this class other than just the difficulty of the exam itself. If you put all of that together, is there another statement you can say to yourself that's maybe a little bit more accurate than this one, I'm going to fail? Okay. So what might be an alternate statement that a student could say to themselves in this situation based on the facts?
I might not fail.
I might not fail. Okay. Okay.
If I use the time I have to study, then I may pass.
Okay. Now, one of the things in anxiety is people tend to think in terms of black and white. I'm going to pass or I'm going to fail. Right? So you might want to go with a gradient here. So if you look at all of these facts, what might be a more accurate than I'm going to fail?
I might not achieve as well as I want to, but still pass the exam.
Okay.
We've never defined fail.
Exactly, yeah. I might not do great, but, and I'm going to just kind of put words in here. I mean, hopefully you want the client to come up with this, but I might not do great, but I'll do good enough. Okay. Do you buy that? Yeah, you're not sure. Okay, what might be something else? Do you buy that? Do you buy that statement? Would that work for you?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. All right, I just saw some, I was reading body language. I wasn't sure, people were buying it. Okay.
Still pass.
Yeah, still pass, right? Yeah. So we have a different statement there, right? So what's really important is that you come up with a statement that the client can defend in their own head. Like when they look at the facts of the situation, this is a believable statement that I can say to myself. Right? So we don't want to be like we were talking about earlier, the person that says, I'm good at math when they're not good at math, and that just makes them feel worse. It needs to be sort of something that they can buy into. Now we ask them, like, how strongly do you believe that to be true? And actually, you often want to ask that back here, too. How strongly do you believe this to be true? Then you go through this process. How strongly do you believe this to be true? Now, will clients say 100%? Not likely, right? Because the possibility always exists that he is going to fail, right? Anybody on any given day could fail their midterm exam, right? So we don't want to set them up for failure, right? So we want something that's believable, but we're not looking for like 100% here. So we ask the client, how strongly do you believe that? So on a scale to 1 to 100, how believable is that to you? 70%, okay. Right, yeah. So that's a reasonable percentage, right? And what you're hoping is that it's higher than, or at least the percentage that they would attach to the original thought. And then we say to the client, well, when you say this to yourself, what's your level of anxiety? So we ask them to rate their anxiety again. And so typically, they will put down, they'll feel better. Because this thought is more comforting to them than that thought. And lo and behold, this thought is more accurate than that thought. And so, okay, how does that make you feel? Now, is it going to go down to 0? Not likely. So, even if they say, okay, my anxiety is now at 70%. Okay, that's better than it was. And we're going to be okay with that. Right. Okay?
How often do you think being a good client plays into that?
What's that?
Like wanting to show that you're being a good client by saying like, oh, now it's only at 50.
Oh, right.
And then can you tell when they're...
Are they? Yeah. Well, hopefully, by the time you kind of get through this process, you've got a good enough connection with the client and that. I've never really sensed that to be kind of an issue. I mean, you're kind of in the work phase of your work, so yeah. Well, that's a good question because it's certainly, I think it does happen. You have certain clients that sort of pleasing you is really important. So you want to be picking up on kind of subtle cues as you go along, and you want to be careful that you're not over pushing it. I think, yeah. Okay. Anybody else? What do you think of that? Is that something you can see yourself doing with someone? Okay. It takes a bit to kind of get your head around it, but it's not that hard to do. And my experience with it is it's really helpful for people. How we think about things has a lot to do with how we feel, and this is a good way to kind of do that. So part of what you do with the client is you give some kind of action plan around this, and when they start to have these negative thoughts and their anxieties going up, they remind themselves of this. But if they don't believe it, then they kind of take themselves through the internal argument. Okay, and that helps kind of settle them with that.
With that, would you take them down a sort of a mitigation strategy tree as well, like pathway as well? So right now we've created a path to success.
Mm-hmm.
But what if the path leads to failure? Do you take them down a path that says, okay, well you're done early enough, you can still drop the course, or there's sort of risk mitigation strategies that can be put in place for fears, right? So is that part of the process too, or?
So I'm not quite sure what you're asking. Some of it, I think what you're referring to is just kind of the practical problem solving.
Yeah.
So if I do bomb this course, then what happens?
Yeah, do you take them down that route as well, or?
You certainly can. Yeah. I think the challenge, there's kind of the problem solving piece of it of, okay, now you failed your course, what's going to happen to you? Are you going to have to drop out? That kind of thing. But you also want to have the discussion about how are you interpreting that? So, okay, I failed this course, therefore I'm a loser. Okay, is that the perspective we're going to leave you with, or can we do some work around that interpretation of yourself based on failing exams? Right?
Yeah, because I'm just thinking if the intention is to reduce anxiety, then you can go through the process of the absolute worst case scenario, and here are your mitigation strategies if that materializes.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah.
Are those acceptable options? Yes, they are. They mitigate the problem.
Yeah, so I think what you're looking at, so earlier on we were talking about when we look at thoughts, people kind of have sort of two themes. One is overemphasizing the dangerousness of the situation, right? So if I failed this course, that's going to be catastrophic. I'm going to have to drop out of university and I'm going to end up becoming a garbage collector. Okay, so they overemphasize kind of the risk in the situation, but they also underestimate their ability to cope with it. So if I did fail that exam, I could handle that, right? I could cope with that. It might mean I have to, spend a little longer at university, or maybe university isn't for me. Maybe it's better that I become a plumber. And so you can work at it at both of those angles. So I think if you have that sort of in the back of your mind as you go through this, what is the catastrophic thinking you want to target, and and sometimes fears are very realistic. Maybe it's highly likely that this individual isn't going to do well in school. Maybe they're just not academically oriented, or maybe they're, ADHD or whatever or learning disabilities gets in the way, and so something else might be better for them. That's perfectly okay. So we don't have to have catastrophic interpretations around failure. It may be just, a life lesson, and the direction of your life and where is it going to go.
It's kind of along the same lines, but I know with anxiety and depression, it's really easy to access the memories that lead for in this. Like the climate will lead you all these reasons why they're going to fail.
Yes.
Why it's catastrophic. So do you have any tips or suggestions for kind of building up the events?
Right. I think for me the key is being kind of anticipating where it's going to go. So getting a really good sort of thought that you're going to work with, right? So that you don't box yourself into a corner with that. Yeah, I think that for me that's always been the key. I think part of it is for us not to buy into. So often, sometimes, like our clients, have you ever worked with somebody who's really depressed and you find yourself getting depressed, right? Or somebody who's really anxious and you start feeling anxious yourself, right? So you have to sort of be able to keep yourself sort of in that objective perspective, so that you can clearly see a way out for them, right? You sort of want to be anticipating that. I think the other thing to say is not every technique works with everybody. So you may do this with someone and just fall flat on your face, right? And maybe it's because you haven't figured out how to do it well enough, or this just is a technique that's not going to work with someone. And that's okay, right? Not everything has to succeed at your end.
Kind of like what Shane was talking about with the mitigation techniques. Like personally, like that's something that I would like to eventually explore with clients. But is there a risk of planting a seed for further failure? Like it's like, oh well, I'm gonna kind of accept that failure is an option, but at the same time, it's like creating a safety net of sorts, so that like if failure does happen, then at least it won't be as bad, and I'll be able to better deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, is there a risk of planting a greater probability of the undesirable outcome occurring?
I suppose. I think it depends how you frame the discussion, because I think it's a really useful discussion about what is your worst fear in this. Now, I think the point of having that discussion is to sort of highlight the catastrophic nature of the interpretation. And so kind of pushing it to like, what is the worst scenario? Chances are that worst scenario isn't particularly likely to happen, right? So, and if it is, then the discussion becomes about your ability to cope with it, right? That second kind of line. So, so I think generally that's not going to kind of put you in a bad place, but I think you're still framing it as kind of that catastrophic, like you're kind of identifying that as a kind of unrealistic way of interpreting it, as opposed to you saying, well, that's going to happen to you. But I think it is also helpful to be kind of like really realistic. Like, yeah, you could fail that exam. You don't want to be Pollyanna and say, oh, you're not going to, all right, yeah, you're smarter than that. You could walk in there and, you'd pass, right? Because that's not believable for a client. And I think it helps if you're really realistic. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. Thanks for letting us videotape this, and thank you for doing this exercise.